3 days before my wedding, my mother told me something about my father that changed how I understood my entire childhood. I need to back up a little so this makes sense. My name doesn't matter for this story, but I'm 28, and in 3 days I was supposed to marry a man named Daniel who I'd been with for 6 years. Everything was already set. The venue was booked. My dress was hanging in a garment bag in my mother's guest room closet because I didn't trust my apartment's tiny closet not to wrinkle it. My future in-laws had already flown in from Ohio. My best friend Priya was staying at my place, steaming table linens at 11 at night, while we drank cheap champagne and made jokes about seating charts. It was supposed to be one of those blissfully boring weeks. Cake tastings. Last-minute alterations. My mom crying a little every time she looked at me, the good kind of crying. Instead, on a Tuesday evening, my mother called me and asked if I could come over. Just me. Not Daniel, not Priya, not my brother Mark. I want to talk to you about something before Saturday, she said. Her voice sounded careful, like she was picking each word up and checking it before she said it out loud. I remember standing in my kitchen holding my phone, feeling that specific kind of dread you get when someone you love asks to talk to you alone and won't tell you why. Is everything okay? I asked. Everything's fine, she said, which is what people say right before they tell you nothing is fine. I drove to her house that night instead of waiting until morning. I couldn't have slept otherwise. My mother, whose name is Carol, has always been the calm one in our family. My father, Robert, died when I was 11, and in the 17 years since then, my mother has run our small family like a woman who refuses to let grief slow her down. She raised my brother and me on a nurse's salary. She never remarried, never really dated seriously that I knew of. She used to say, whenever anyone asked her about it, I had my great love. I don't need a second one. I always thought that was one of the most romantic things I'd ever heard. I built a lot of my own ideas about love around that sentence. When I got to her house, she was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea already poured, like she'd been rehearsing this. The porch light was on. I remember that detail specifically because it made the whole thing feel like the beginning of something, not the end. Sit down, honey, she said. I sat. I need you to know I've thought about whether to tell you this for a long time, she said. Years, actually. And I decided that if I didn't tell you before you got married, I might never forgive myself. My stomach dropped in the specific way it does when you already know, somewhere underneath the part of your brain that processes language, that you're about to hear something that will not unhear itself. Mom, you're scaring me. She reached across the table and took my hand, which she almost never does. My mother shows love through casseroles and folded laundry, not through touch. Your father, she said, wasn't who you think he was. Not entirely. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I want to be honest about what went through my mind in that half second of silence. I thought affair. I thought secret family. I thought dead, gambling, something ugly and small that would just make me sad about a man I already missed. I did not think what she actually said next. Robert wasn't your biological father. The kitchen got very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I could hear my own heartbeat, which is a strange thing to notice, but I did. What? I said, because it was the only word that came out. I was seeing someone before I met your dad. Briefly. It ended badly, and I didn't even know I was pregnant until after your father and I had already started getting serious. He knew. From the beginning, he knew you weren't his biologically, and he told me the day I found out that it didn't matter to him, that he wanted to be your father regardless. And he was. God, honey, he was your father in every way that counts. I sat there holding a mug of tea that was rapidly going cold in my hands, trying to reconcile the man I had spent 17 years missing, a man who taught me to ride a bike, who used to do the voices for every character when he read to me, who cried at my elementary school graduation, with the sudden fact that none of my blood came from him. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. Because you're about to start your own family, she said. And because your biological father reached out to me. 6 months ago. That was the part that really knocked the air out of me. He's alive. Yes. And you've been talking to him. A little. Not much. He found out I never told you. And he's been asking me to let him reach out before you got married. I kept telling him no. But then I thought about how I'd feel if you found out some other way, years from now, after I was gone, and you found out I'd known and never said anything. I couldn't do that to you. Not with something this big. I want to tell you I handled this gracefully. I didn't. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loud against the floor, and I said something like, I need air. and I walked out onto her back porch and stood there in the cold, staring at nothing, while my mother sat inside giving me the space I clearly needed. Here's the thing about Reddit-worthy family stories. They're never really about the shocking fact itself. They're about what you do with it. And what I did, in that moment, standing on my mother's porch 3 days before my wedding, was call my brother Mark. He didn't know either. I could hear it in the long silence after I told him. "Wait," he finally said. "Does that mean you're still my full brother?" I said, because I knew exactly where his brain had gone, because mine had gone there too. "Mom said you and I have the same dad. Just not the same as her first, as the man before dad." "Okay," he said slowly. "Okay, I need a minute." We stayed on the phone in silence together for almost a full minute, which if you've never done it with someone, is a strange kind of intimacy. Just breathing, both of us processing. "Are you going to talk to him?" Mark finally asked. "This other guy?" "I don't know," I said. "I don't know anything right now." When I went back inside, my mother was still sitting at the table, and she looked older than I'd ever seen her look. Not tired older, scared older. "I'm not asking you to do anything with this information right now," she said. "I know the timing is terrible. I've hated myself all week for not finding a better time, but there is no better time for something like this. I just couldn't let you walk down that aisle without knowing." "Does Daniel know?" I asked. "Have you told anyone else?" "No. This is yours to decide who to tell and when. I only told Mark because you asked him, and I understand why you did." I remember looking at her and feeling this strange double vision. She was still my mother, still the woman who'd raised me, still the person I trusted most in the world, and also, suddenly, someone who had held a secret this large for 17 years without a single crack showing. Did Robert, ever resent it?" I asked. Me not being his. My mother's eyes filled up immediately. "Never," she said. "Not once. If anything, I think he loved you a little fiercer because of it. Like he had something to prove, not to you, but to himself. He used to say you were the best decision he never had to make." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my childhood bedroom because I couldn't bring myself to drive back to my apartment, and I stared at the ceiling and thought about every memory I had of my father, running them back through this new information like rewatching a movie after someone tells you the twist ending. The way he used to squeeze my shoulder before I went into an exam and say, "You've got my brains, kid, you'll be fine." And how I used to laugh, because everyone said I got my stubbornness from him, my sense of humor from him. Except I hadn't. Not biologically. And somehow, impossibly, it hadn't mattered. He had built those things into me anyway, just by being present for every single day of my life that counted. That should have been the end of it. A sad, complicated truth, delivered too close to a wedding, that I could grieve quietly and move past. But 3 days is not a lot of time, and secrets like this one rarely stay still. The next morning, my mother called me again, and this time her voice had a different kind of tightness in it. "He wants to come to the wedding," she said. "Your biological father. He says he doesn't need to be introduced as anything. He just wants to see you get married. From a distance, if that's what you want." I stood in my kitchen holding my phone for the second time in 2 days, and I realized that whatever I decided next was going to follow me for the rest of my life. I didn't answer her right away. I just stood there in my kitchen, phone against my ear, listening to my mother breathe on the other end, waiting. "What's his name?" I finally asked. It was such a strange thing to not know about a man who was, biologically, half the reason I existed. "Thomas," she said. "Thomas Reyes." I said it out loud once, quietly, just to see how it felt in my mouth. It didn't feel like anything. It felt like a stranger's name, because that's exactly what it was. "I need to think," I told her. "Please tell him not yet. Not the wedding. I can't have him there. I can't have a stranger standing in a crowd watching me marry Daniel while Robert's family is sitting in the front row missing him. It's too much." "I understand," she said. "I'll tell him." But even as I said it, I understood that not yet wasn't the same as no. And some part of me was already leaving a door open I hadn't meant to leave open. I called Priya after that, because I needed someone who wasn't inside the bloodline of this mess to help me think straight. She came over within 20 minutes, still in her pajama pants, hair thrown up, and she didn't say a single word about the wedding logistics she'd been drowning in the night before. She just sat next to me on my couch and let me talk. "I keep trying to figure out why I'm so upset," I told her. "Robert was my dad. That doesn't change. So why does it feel like the ground moved?" "Because it did move," Priya said. "Not under the parts of you that were true. Under the story you thought you knew. Those are different things, but they still shake you. I hadn't cried yet. Not really. Not until she said that. Then I cried for probably 20 minutes straight, the ugly kind. And she just sat there rubbing my back and not trying to fix anything. Because there was nothing to fix. There was only something to feel. That afternoon, my future mother-in-law, Linda, texted me a photo of the welcome bag she and Daniel's sister had put together for out-of-town guests, all tied with little ribbons, and I remember staring at that picture feeling like it belonged to someone else's life. A simpler one. Daniel noticed something was wrong before I said a word. That's one of the things I've always loved about him. He doesn't wait for me to perform being fine before he asks if I'm not. "Hey," he said, when I came by his apartment that evening under the excuse of dropping off a suit fitting he'd forgotten to pick up. "Talk to me." I hadn't planned on telling him yet. I told myself I needed more time to sit with it alone first. But looking at him, I understood that keeping it from him for even one more day would plant a version of the same seed my mother had carried for 17 years, and I didn't want that kind of weight sitting quietly in our marriage before it even started. So I told him. All of it. Robert, Thomas, the phone call that morning, the request to come to the wedding. Daniel didn't say anything for a long moment after I finished. He just held my hand across his kitchen table, thumb moving slowly over my knuckles, the way he does when he's thinking hard about something instead of rushing to fill silence with words. "How do you feel?" he finally asked. Not "what should we do?" Not "is this going to ruin the wedding?" Just, "How do you feel?" "Like I'm mourning my dad again," I said. Which doesn't make sense, because he's been gone 17 years. "It makes complete sense," Daniel said. "You're not just finding out a fact. You're losing a version of your own history. That's a real loss, even if nothing about Robert's love for you changed." I don't think I fully believe that yet, but hearing him say it helped. "What about the wedding?" I asked. "What about the guy?" "Thomas, that's your call," Daniel said. "Whatever you decide, I'm not going anywhere. But for what it's worth, I don't think you have to decide anything about him this week. You're allowed to just get married first and figure out the rest of your life after." It sounded so simple when he said it. It didn't feel simple, but it gave me something to hold on to. The next day, 2 days before the wedding, my mother called again, and this time her voice had an edge of urgency I hadn't heard from her before. "He's not going to push about the wedding," she said. "But he asked me something else, and I told him I'd pass it along, and then it's entirely up to you. He has something of your father's, your biological father's, that he's wanted to give you for years. He says he's not trying to insert himself into your life. He just wants you to have it, whether or not you ever want to meet him." "What is it?" "A letter," she said. "He wrote it when you were born, before things ended between us. He never sent it because things ended before he had the chance, and then I never told him where we'd landed. And then years passed, and it felt too late. He kept it anyway." I sat with that for a long moment. A letter written to me before I could even hold my own head up, sealed for 28 years, arriving 3 days before I made my own vows to someone else. "I don't know if I want to read it," I admitted. "You don't have to decide today," my mother said. "It'll still be there whenever you're ready. Nothing about this has to happen on your timeline of the wedding. I think I made it feel that way by bringing it up now, and I'm sorry for that. I just couldn't carry it any longer by myself." That's the piece that finally cracked something open in me. Not the letter, not Thomas, but the picture of my mother carrying this thing alone for 17 years, watching me grieve my father as a child, watching me build my whole understanding of love and family around him, and saying nothing because she believed silence was protecting me. "Were you ever going to tell me if he hadn't reached out?" I asked her. There was a long pause. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I'd like to think I would have eventually. But I also understand if you don't believe that. I made a choice a long time ago to protect what you and your father had built, and I don't regret protecting it. I only regret that I didn't trust you enough to handle the whole truth alongside it. I didn't say I forgive you. I wasn't there yet. But I said, I understand why you did it. And for that night, it was enough for both of us." The day before the wedding was supposed to be rehearsal, dinner with both families, an early night. Instead, it became the day I finally decided to read the letter. My mother brought it over herself, driving 20 minutes to hand me a small yellowed envelope with my name written on the front in handwriting I'd never seen before and would somehow recognize forever after. She didn't come inside. She said this part wasn't hers to be present for, and she left it in my hands on the porch and drove away. I sat on my bed and held that envelope for almost an hour before I opened it. Inside was a single page, and near the top, before anything else, it said, "*I don't know if I'll ever get to give you this, but I wanted there to be proof. somewhere, that I wanted you before I ever met you. Asterisk. I read every word twice. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't trying to compete with Robert, or explain away leaving, or ask for anything. It was just a young man, scared and hopeful, writing to a daughter he didn't yet know he'd lose the chance to raise, hoping that someday, somehow, she'd know he had thought of her first. I cried reading it, but it wasn't the same kind of crying as 3 days earlier. It felt less like grief and more like relief, the strange kind that comes from finally understanding a shape that used to only be a shadow. That night, the night before my wedding, I called my mother back. I don't want to meet him tomorrow, I said. Or this week. Or maybe for a long time. But I don't want you to tell him no forever. Just not now. I need my wedding day to be about the family I already know how to love. That's more than fair, she said. And I could hear something in her voice loosen, like she'd been holding her breath for 17 years and had finally let a little of it out. And Mom, I added, I don't want this to be a secret anymore either. Not a scandal, not something we whisper about. Just a true thing that happened that we can talk about when we need to. I think that's the only way any of us actually heals from it. I'd like that, she said quietly. I think your father would have liked that too. He never wanted you to feel like there was anything shameful in your story. He just wanted you to feel like his daughter, completely, without question. And you were. You are. I slept better that night than I expected to, given everything. Maybe because for the first time in 3 days, I wasn't holding a secret by myself. Maybe because I'd finally stopped trying to solve the entire shape of my identity in 72 hours and let myself just be a woman who was getting married the next day, carrying a complicated, true history like everyone eventually does. My wedding day arrived the way wedding days do, too fast and somehow also achingly slow, full of curling irons and nervous laughter, and Priya zipping up the back of my dress with hands that shook slightly more than mine did. Walking down the aisle, I looked for my mother first, the way I imagine most brides look for their mothers, and she was already crying, one hand pressed flat against her chest like she was trying to hold her own heart in place. Mark stood beside her, and when our eyes met, he gave me the smallest nod, the kind that says I know, I see you, we're okay. I didn't look for an empty seat in the back for a stranger who wasn't there. I didn't think about Thomas Reyes at all during the ceremony, not once, and I think that surprised me more than anything else that week had. Instead, I thought about Robert. I thought about him walking me to school on days my mother worked early shifts, doing all the voices when he read The Hobbit to me over a whole summer, standing in the driveway teaching me to parallel park with more patience than I deserved. None of that had required my blood. All of it had required his choice, made over and over, every single day, to be my father. When the officiant asked if anyone wished to say a blessing over the couple, my mother stood, which we hadn't planned, and said only this. I've learned this week that love isn't something you inherit. It's something you choose, every day, whether or not anyone's watching, whether or not it's easy. Robert chose it every day of his life. I hope you two do the same. Nobody but Mark and I understood the full weight of that sentence, and that felt right. Some truths don't need an audience. They just need to be spoken once, out loud, by the person who's carried them the longest. I did eventually read Thomas's letter again, weeks after the honeymoon, in a quieter moment, and I did eventually write back to him. Not a reunion, not forgiveness exactly, just an acknowledgement that his letter had reached me, 28 years late, and that it had mattered. Whether we ever meet in person is still something I haven't decided. I've stopped feeling like I owe anyone a timeline on that. What I know now, that I didn't know 3 days before my wedding, is that a family isn't a fact you're born into. It's something proven, in small daily acts, by the people who choose to stay. My mother stayed. Robert stayed, even though nothing obligated him to. And now I get to choose, in my own time, what to do with the truth about the man who couldn't. Sometimes the people who love us the most aren't hiding the truth to deceive us. They're just trying to protect the only kind of love they know how to give.